Welcome to the 11th episode of our summer series on the history behind the hymns. Today we're exploring a hymn from the year 1779. And as we wrap up, we will have a special treat for you. We'll feature a musician who has graciously allowed us to use her song. Please use the opportunity to explore their YouTube and social media work to show your appreciation for their contributing to this podcast and to the world of hymns. Welcome to Church History. I'm your host, Laura-Lee Siemens. This is our summer season. I'm telling the stories of our great hymns. This podcast tells the story of the church in chronological order. We started with the story of Jesus, and we have traveled through history into the 1800s. For this summer, we're going to tell the story of the church in chronological order through our great hymns. So, enjoy this summer season. Edward Perronet was born in 1726 in Sundridge, Kent, England. He was the son of Vincent Perronet, an Anglican vicar and a close friend of John and Charles Wesley, the founders of the Methodists. And we have talked a lot about John and Charles Wesley, as well as others in their friend circle in the last few episodes. So Edward was one of the sons of one of the friends of John and Charles Wesley. This connection with this group of pastors and revival leaders profoundly shaped Edward's life and his career. In 1746, Edward became very actively involved in the Methodist movement, even working closely with John and Charles Wesley. Despite his father's Anglican roots, Edward more aligned with the Methodists. This was a time of the great religious revivals and reforms, where the Wesley brothers were the forefront of the movement. The Methodists and the Anglicans were very different. Their personal and heartfelt approach to faith very much resonated with Edward. By 1756, Edward had begun preaching in Methodist chapels and occasionally even filled in for John Wesley when he was absent. He became known for his powerful sermons and deep commitment to the Methodist cause. Remember, the 1700s were a time of significant social and religious change. Life for the poor was incredibly difficult. There was limited opportunities for education and employment. The Methodist movement, focusing on justice and outreach to the poor, offered hope and support to the many who were struggling. However, the 1760s brought tension between Edward and John Wesley, particularly over the issue of lay preaching. Edward believed that lay preachers should have more autonomy, while Wesley maintained strict control over the movement. The tension started in the 1760s, but it grew stronger over the years. The control issue was a big struggle within the Methodist movement as the group grew and evolved. Edward saw a lot of problems with the church as a whole, especially with the Anglican church. The Wesleys really focused their preaching on preaching to the masses and to educating the uneducated in biblical literacy. But Edward felt God had given him a passion of pointing out issues in the Anglican church, also known as the Church of England, that needed fixing. This was a really big deal because the king was the head of the Church of England, so going against the Church of England was seen as going against the king and unpatriotic. In 1766, Edward published a satire pamphlet called the Mitre, which criticized the established Church of England and its hierarchy. This pamphlet reflected the growing dissatisfaction with the church's structure, and it supported a radical reform. His bold critiques made waves, and it showed his willingness to challenge authority and advocate for change. This publication actually holds significant importance in church history, and it reflects a pivotal moment of dissent and reform within the established Church of England. I will include a link to this poem in the show notes if you would like to read it. This pamphlet was a catalyst for challenging the status quo, and it advocated for radical reform. There were so many others who had been afraid to speak out against the church, but suddenly they were inspired to say the things they had been afraid to say before. It only took one man to have courage and willingness to openly criticize the church leadership, but that demonstrated a commitment to confronting injustice and to promoting greater transparency and accountability within the religious institutions. Edward inspired others to question the church's authority and demand meaningful change. This paved the way for future reform and a renewal movement within the Anglicans. Throughout the 1700s, Edward continued his ministry, focusing on writing and preaching. He promoted Methodist ideals, but he also critiqued the Anglican Church. His passion for reform and dedication to his faith were evident in all of his works. But one of the most significant moments in Edward's life came in 1779 when he wrote a hymn. Now remember, he was known as someone who spoke out against the Church of England, which was sort of speaking out against the King of England, who was the head of the church. And people questioned him because of that. So thinking about that context, think about the words that he wrote in his hymn, "All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name," reminding people that Jesus was the King and the only one who we should be hailing. This hymn gained so much popularity and became known as the coronation hymn. It was often called the national anthem of Christendom because it was used in Christian worship across all of the denominations. We're not actually sure of the day that it was written, but most historians put it in the year 1779 or around that time period. The powerful lyrics and the majestic melody captured the hearts of so many, became a staple in worship services, and reminded everyone that Jesus is our King. In 1782, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name was published in the November issue of the Gospel magazine. This was a very famous evangelical publication of the time, and when it was published, that really cemented its place in Christian hymnology and ensured it would reach an even wider audience. By 1785, Edward had left the Methodist movement and began preaching as an independent preacher. But despite his departure, he continued to advocate for his religious beliefs through preaching and writing. He had an unwavering commitment to his faith. Edward passed away on January the 2nd, 1792 in Canterbury, Kent, England. He is remembered for his contributions to hymns and his efforts in the Methodist movements and speaking out against the problems in the Anglican Church. But his hymn, All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, remains a testament to his deep faith, and that is what has left a lasting legacy in Christian worship. Thanks for joining me as we've looked at the life of Edward Perronet. I hope you're enjoying our series on the history of hymns. If you are, don't forget to subscribe and share these hymns with others who might find it interesting. And I would love to hear from you and how you are feeling about these songs. Now, if I was looking for someone to sing All Hail the Power of Jesus' Name, it had to be a church. And I'm so thankful that the Village Church has allowed me to use their song. It's so beautiful. Enjoy this song, and you can find links to their music in the show notes.
All hail the power of Jesus' name. Let angels prostrate fall. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Bring forth the royal diadem and crown him Lord of all. Chosen seed grace and crown him Lord of all. Hail him who saved you by his grace and crown him Lord of all. Yonder sacred throne, we at his feet may fall. Join in the everlasting song and crown him Lord of all. Join in the everlasting song and crown him Lord of all.
Thank you for listening to today's episode on the history of the hymns. We will be returning to our regular church history podcast in September. If you want to hear more podcasts, check out my website, lauraleesiemens.com. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share these stories with your friends. We'll see you next week.